Good morning. We are going to start off this morning looking at daily goal check reports, and this follows on from what we were doing yesterday with the goal cards, learning about goal cards and how they work. A lot of schools again don't use the daily goal check reports. It is something that is a very, very good process to get into your school if you're not using them. And a lot of people think, wow, they're just too hard, we can't do it. But it's like anything else. It's difficult when you first start out, but once you're used to them, they're really quite simple. So why do we use a daily goal check report and what does it do? So we're just going to look at those things first. Why? Well, it maintains quality control. When you are doing a daily check on the goals of the student, you know what is happening in your learning centre. You don't have to guess, you don't have to worry, you know exactly what's going on. It reduces the necessity for close control throughout the day, because you know that at the end of the day or in the morning, whenever you decide you're going to do your goal check report, you're going to pick up anything that hasn't gone right the day before or during that day. So it gives you that release, particularly if you've got a small school and you don't have many staff. This actually allows the staff to concentrate on the students while the students are in the learning centre. And while the students are actually in the learning centre, they should be your number one priority. It gives an overview of what the students have completed each day. So instead of you having to go around and look at every single goal card, and even looking at the goal card doesn't give you the whole picture, because a student can write anything on the goal card. It doesn't necessarily mean that they've done that work. So that's the big thing with the goal check report. Okay, we do this every day. Now, you can choose when you do your goal check report. ACE recommend that you do it first thing in the morning. We used to do ours last thing in the afternoon. So it's up to you how you do that. And then in the morning, when the homework came in, we'd just check off the homework on the goal check report because all the rest was done for that day. But if you do it first thing every day, that's fine. In the morning, the learning centre should look like this. The supervisor should be doing testing. First thing in the morning, the supervisor takes the students who are going to do their tests and they do testing, okay? The monitor would at that same time be doing the goal check report. So what are the students doing? The students should be going on with their pacework or doing their tests. Now, again, in theory, that's great, but in practice, what I found was that if I was doing the testing and my monitor was doing the goal check report, then particularly if I had senior students and they'd done homework, they were sitting with their flag up waiting for somebody because they couldn't go on with their work until they'd done their scoring, which was why we changed the goal check report to the afternoon to release the monitor in the morning. So you need to work out what works in your school context. But for me, that was how I did it. And I haven't got a problem with anybody changing those sorts of things. It's not important when you do it, it's important that you do it. So make it easy. With the goal check reports, you have one report for each student each term. So they have, I think, 12 weeks on each of the sheets. And you can photocopy these sheets. We can send you one and you can just print them out as you need them. So it's not something extra that you have to buy. But in each learning centre, to make it easy, you put the reports not in alphabetical order, but in the order that the students are seated in your learning centre. So you start from one corner and go the next student, next student, next student, so that when the monitor is doing the goal check report, they don't have to flip through, they just turn to the next page, go to the next office. Make it very simple. So there's one report for each student. I've always found it's better to have them on a clipboard or in a folder. We used to always have ours on a clipboard so you could just flip it over the top and be on the next sheet really easily. But you need to, again, work out what works for you and what you have available. And there are a list of abbreviations that we use on the goal check report, and I used to just stick them to the clipboard so that they were there for reference to them for the monitor, so that she didn't have to remember everything. After a while you get to know all the ones that you use all the time, but they're just there as a quick reference. Or if your monitor's away and someone else is doing it, it's easy for them to know what to do. It should take 1 to 3 minutes per student. Now obviously if you first start out doing this, it's going to take a little longer, but you can get this down really, really quick so that it can take 1 to 3 minutes per student to do a quick check on what they've done in their paces, check it off on their goal card, check it off on your sheet, move to the next student. So it doesn't need to take a long time. So, and you should not be disturbing the students while you're doing it. And that's another reason that we like to do it at the end of the day. The students would write their goals, and while we were praying and finishing the day off and giving out homework notes and slips and things like that, the monitor would go around and do the goal check report, because the students aren't actually doing pace work at that point in time anyhow. So it's not actually stopping them from doing their pace work. Okay, so this is what a goal check report looks like. It's very small on here. It is in the procedures manual, number 1, so you can look that up in your procedures manual and have a good look at it. And there is a section talking about what to do with a goal check report. But we are going to go through that fairly intensely. Now this is the symbol. Hello, where's my red thing? So these are the symbols here that you use, and again they're fairly small. But you can see that we have the student's name up here, the date, that's their birth date, which semester it is and which year it is, and then week 1. Now you can record all sorts of things on here. This next box here is for privilege level, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You circle, this is in English, and they've got a circle and an M, which means that they've had a violation, violation and a detention, something to do with what was in their English. Most likely paces not completed and the goal card crossed off or something like that. And in this part here, it's the comments field, so you can put anything there. This one here with the tick against it, that's homework, and they've ticked that the homework has been done and been brought back in. And so it's a great way of recording what's going on. So you can also use this to, so this records what's happening in the goals, but it's also really good because this can record all your merits or demerits, mainly demerits, and it's also a really good record to keep, and this is what you can show parents if the students are falling behind and the parent comes to the school and says, Sally's not doing her work, you're not making her work, what's happening, rah, rah, rah. You've got this, and you can say, well, she had a violation here, she didn't finish her goals here, she didn't finish her goals here. I can show you the record for the whole term of exactly what she's done. And we've spoken to her about it. You can see here, here, and here that we've spoken to her about it. It's a great record to show that you're actually following up on things that are happening in the Learning Centre. So we're going to have a look at that closer later on today. So what are we checking when we do a goal check report? We're checking the day's pace work. We're checking the goal card and we're checking the pace. So we're actually going to look at the goal card and the pace. So number 1, you need the goal card first. So are goals set correctly? So are they in blue pen? Have yesterday's goals been crossed off correctly? We're in that point 1, are goals set correctly? Are the goals actually set correctly? Do we have goals that are actually sequential? Are they following on from one another? Are there pages missed? Are there, pages that have been duplicated, or what are they doing? So do the page numbers set follow on from yesterday's or today's? Is there a number in the total pages column, and is it sufficient? So, if you teach your students to add that to that last column on the goal card where it tells you how many pages they've done in a day, that is a really good indicator. Because if they normally are doing, say, 21, 25 pages and all of a sudden they've done 11, you need to know what's going on. It's a pretty clear indicator that something is happening. And do goals end at a logical point? In other words, they haven't ended halfway through a checkup or halfway through a self-test or something like that. So we're checking the goal cards. So repeat paces have higher goals. If a student is doing a repeat pace because they've failed in a test, they should only get about 5 to 9 days to complete that. So they should be able to complete that within a 2-week period. Because they've already done that pace before. This is just a revision pace because they failed the test. Have any goals been changed? And if they have, were they given permission by the supervisor? And that would be shown by the supervisor's initial in green pen on the goal card. Are there too many or too few pages being set? So that's the things we're looking for on the goal card. Now we're going to then check the pace. Are the goal pages completed and scored according to the goal card? So does what is written on the goal card match what has happened in the pace? That's what we're really looking for. So you can see that once you get used to doing this, you can actually go through and do this very, very quickly. Is scoring being done correctly? Now, this doesn't mean that the monitor checks the student's scoring. You are looking at the scoring procedures. So are they marking the X's for errors next to the question number down the side of the page? Are they filling in the scoring strip correctly? Are they actually circling errors once they've been corrected? And are they checking each page and circling the page number to show that they've checked that page and it is now complete? So there you go, that's what we just talked about. Has the supervisor initial checkups, self-tests and supervisor to score strips? Or is the student just working through and not talking to the supervisor at all? So these are things that you can pick up when you do the goal check report. Are there extra marks or drawings in the pace? And this can be an indicator that a student is 1, lost, or 2, not paying attention. They're not focusing on what they should be doing while they're in their office. We need to teach students, look, some students are super creative and I think that's fabulous and there's nothing wrong with that. But we actually need to teach them that there is a time and a place to be creative, and in their pace is not that time or that place. So if they, a good thing to do with those really creative students is say to them, if you finish your goals, you can have a piece of paper and do a drawing. But encourage them not to be drawing during the pace time or in their pace. In scripture verses, is there correct spelling in the scripture verse? Because often what we find is that students actually correct their work, but they don't check the scripture. So where they've filled in the words in the scripture, often there's a few things that I see often, and one of them is that children write shall instead of shall. So S-H-E-L-L instead of S-H-A-L-L. So, it has quite a different meaning, so it's incorrect. The other thing that they do is a small g for God and Jesus and things like that. So things like that, they need to be taught. That is actually something you should be checking when you're checking your work, when you're scoring your work, because that's actually in the score key. So there's no reason that they shouldn't check it. And are spelling errors wrong? Yes, they are. And I've had people say to me, oh, but that's only in word building. No, if they're wrong, they're wrong. We don't just do spelling in word building, we do actually do spelling in science and in social studies and all the way through the curriculum. So if it's spelt incorrectly, it is actually wrong and they should correct it. So checking the paces. Are the dotted examples filled in? In the paces, when you are looking at the paces, they will often have a dotted example done in purple. And that is actually for the students to trace over or to write over, so that they actually do an example or a practice one. But a lot of times I see them left blank. And sometimes, sometimes when we read something, we don't really get it till we actually do it. And so that's why those examples are there, so that they actually do it, and they do it correctly the first time, so that they've got an idea when they're doing it on their own without that dotted example, that they've got an idea of how it should be done. So we should be making sure those dotted examples are filled in. Are yesterday's mistakes corrected? Now this is a big one. If there are errors from yesterday or things that they haven't scored correctly or done correctly, have they been corrected? We're going to talk about that again in a minute. Is the pace reasonably neat? Now, I had a friend who had a school in New Zealand, and one of their really big things in their school was they demanded the children to be super neat. And I honestly thought it was way over the top. I really did. Because they would make them erase things and erase them again if they weren't written neatly. But I can tell you that those children actually learned an enormous amount. So, I thought it would be detrimental to their learning. It was actually the opposite. It made them actually pay a lot of attention to what they were doing and actually increased the learning in that learning centre. So I was actually quite surprised by that. So don't be afraid to demand neatness from your students. I probably wouldn't go way over the top with it, and particularly with students who have learning difficulties or something like that. You need to, there are different allowances for them. But for average everyday students who have been taught to write correctly, there is no reason that they shouldn't be writing neatly. My rule of thumb is if I can't read it, it's wrong. So that's my rule of thumb. If I can't read it, it's wrong. Because if I can't read it, what's the point of it being there? Another thing that I always taught our children was that neat writing is actually a courtesy to the reader. Because you're writing it because you want somebody to be able to read it. So if you're not writing neatly, then you're making their job more difficult. So neatness is important, and it should be something that we ask the children to make sure that their work is neat. Looking for signs of cheating. Now we're going to do a whole session on cheating, so I'm not going to go into what those signs are here. But there are many, many things that you can pick up very, very quickly in a pace as a sign of cheating. And remember that you are actually checking procedures at this point, not answers. You're not going through and checking the answers. You're just checking that they've done the work. Okay, now recording errors in the student's pace. If you find errors, if you find things that are not done, a green cross next to something to say this hasn't been completed, an SP next to a spelling error, again down that side of the page next to the question number. And then what you do, I'm going to walk across here, sorry, is on the front of the pace, just on the front of the pace here, in green pen, or my monitor actually used to use a purple pen, so we knew what the monitor had written and what the supervisor had written. But you can do as you like. But in the monitor's pen colour, record the number of any page that has an error that the student has to fix up on the front of the pace. And then what happens is when the students come in the first thing next morning, they see that pace and they go, oh no, I've got page 12 and 13 written on the front here. What did I do? They go in, they fix it up, and then when they've fixed it up and scored it and done whatever they need to do, they actually circle those numbers on the front of their pace to say that they have been done. Okay, it's a really easy system, very visual system that makes it easy for the monitor the next day. They've circled that, the monitor just has a quick look, yes, they've done it, tick, that's finished. Okay, so that's how we record if they have made errors in their paces. Okay, so we complete the report. This is also a way of recording attendance, so it's like an all-in-one sheet. It's actually a really great sheet to use. You can make notations as needed and comments. And the next thing after the report is done, the monitor should be reporting to the supervisor. And the way they should be doing that is to tell them about anyone who needs assistance. So when you do the goal check, you see that Sally has obviously not finished her maths goals today, and looks like she's really stuck on this problem on page 7. So you just note, stuck on page 7, and that goes to the supervisor. The supervisor reads that. My monitor was wonderful, and she used to give me a verbal report. She would come and she would just stand and go through each student, right, no problem with them today, right, this one has a problem in maths, so I'd note that down in my diary. The next day I would make sure that I went and saw that student. So it's just a way of picking up on things that are happening with the students. Students who have discrepancies, there's a problem on somebody's goal card, so the monitor reports that to the supervisor. The next day you go, you talk to the student, you sort it out with them. And it means that anything that is happening in your learning centre is being picked up on straight away. So it's not being left for 3 or 4 days before you realise that Sally's stuck on her maths. It's not being left for 3 or 4 days before you realise that somebody's got repeat goals that they keep doing day after day after day, and is actually not doing any work. So these things are picked up the day that they happen, and they're dealt with the next day. And any errors in procedures and scoring and things like that. Now, we all know that sometimes we miss things. So it's a good idea that we're reminded about them. In the scriptures, Paul says at one point, and I can't remember where it is, but he says, I tell you again and again. And I think, yeah, he knows us. We need telling again and again, and anybody who's a parent knows that you don't just tell your child once about something. Normally you have to tell them again and again. And how do we learn? We learn precept by precept, don't we? So we learn it, but we've got to be reminded about it, and we've got to be reminded about it. And that happens with the children too in the learning centre. They need to be reminded. They get a little slack sometimes, and they need to be reminded. Well, that's not how you do it. Remember, you've got to do it like this. And so this is a great way of making sure that all of those things are happening the right way in your learning centre, and just really keeping you right on top of everything that's happening in the learning centre. It's also a great method of record keeping. You can note demerits on there, and this can actually be really, really handy, because oftentimes with children who have some sort of behavioural problem or even learning difficulties, there's often a cycle that you can pick up. But if you've never got it written down, you can't see the pattern. Whereas if you're writing these things down, you can go, oh, that's really interesting. By week 3 each term, this child is doing this. So something's obviously happening there, or this seems to happen in a cycle. Every 3 or 4 weeks we go through this same thing. And it just alerts you to those things so that you're managing the classroom better. And also it means that you can pray for that student, you can pray intelligently for the students, but also it means that you can look for triggers. What is actually causing this behaviour to happen? Because if you're not aware of the cycle, then you're not going to be aware of the trigger, because you're not going to be aware that there is a cycle. So it's something, we had a lot of children from dysfunctional families at our school, And it was I actually used to keep a book at first, and then I realised we could just do it on the goal check reports. And so just keeping a record of behaviour patterns, really struggled today. It doesn't have to be huge things, but just then being aware, well, what's caused this child to struggle today? What I need to be alert, because every Tuesday there's a problem. Maybe I need to talk to mum about what happens Tuesday morning before they come to school. There can be those things that you can just pick up on the children and understand, but you're never going to see those patterns if you don't have it written down somewhere. It's also a record for homework. So the children, it would be marked in the afternoon on hours that they would have homework. When they came in the morning, as they came through the door, they would hand the monitor their goal card and their homework, and the monitor would then just check it off on the goal check report while we were doing devotions. And then by the time we'd done devotions, all the homework would be checked off, the pacers would be back in their office, they'd be ready to go. So that worked really, really well for us. And at the end of the term, it's a good idea to file these in the student's permanent record folder, in the folder that you keep all their records in, so that you have a record of what the student has done in previous terms. Now, I used to keep them for as long as the students were in the school, basically, because it gave you the story of what had happened with them, particularly with students who had problems. It could give you a real picture of what was happening with that student. But I would suggest that you keep them at least for a year, because that gives you a good idea of what's happening in the student's life that year. And for me, I like to keep them because I like to look back and go, well, and sometimes it's good to look back and go, wow, I can't believe they had so many demerits. Look, this year they've had practically none. There is improvement happening in my school. Because sometimes as staff we need to see that, because it doesn't always feel like it's happening. So it can be good for those purposes too. Okay. So are there any questions on goal check reports? We are going to have a look at one individually later on, and just have a look at how they work and what they look like, so that if somebody asks you about them, or if you're using them in your learning centre, that you have an idea of what they look like. Okay?
Yeah, I find that, like over the years with homeschooling, when we first started, all the mums were very diligent with them. But as years have progressed and things are sort of it's not as hands-on, to say, most of the other mums don't get to that.
Yeah.
They still do it, but not as in that
sense. Yeah, not as formal.
I think they're great. I just think they're like a diary of every day.
They are.
Especially in the homeschooling setup. It's like a way of checking yourself.
Yes.
And just getting a clear picture of what. So it's hands-on and.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in the school setting, you can't always know what is happening with every child every single day.
Sure.
But, if you're using the goal check reports, and that report is coming back to you, and again, if you have a good monitor, then that monitor is going to, because they're doing it every day, they're going to pick up on things really, really quickly. And we found that when we didn't use them at first because I didn't understand how to use them. But when we were taught how to use them, and I understood what they were for and how to do it, we found that they were fabulous. And they did take a little while to get used to, but once you're used to them, they become such a useful tool in the learning centre. So they are really well worthwhile spending the time getting used to them and practicing doing them because of what they give back to you. So yeah. Any other questions?